The second panel, and this time we are going to have 4 people present among the panelists, and one person will be joining us and has actually joined us, and that's Giles Dixon, the CEO of European Wind Energy Association. Giles, you're welcome. I hope you can hear us well. Say a word. No, we can't hear you. Are you muted?
I'm not muted, no.
Oh, fantastic. Now we can hear you. All right.
Good,
so,
excellent.
As far as I understand, you are far away, so we have to wait a second or two for the signal to come through. All right.
Right.
But since we cannot presume that all the followers of the conference have been watching from the beginning, so I'll still do some formal introduction of the panel and of the focus of this particular panel. So panel 2 of this conference is focusing on, on some more market-related aspects, on possibility to balance out the energy prices with the introduction of more wind energy. And as we heard on the first panel, offshore wind energy definitely has huge potential to scale up these processes. So, but is it really always so that the presence of large offshore wind capacities ensure or even guarantee lower electricity prices? We've seen over the last year, and not only during this period, that there have been actually cases where there's huge wind energy production, but the prices are still not as low as we would love them to be. So I will be happy for the panelists to comment on that as well. But prior to that, I would like still to do a small tour de table and invite all the participants to introduce themselves and their organization. All right, so let's start with Kaspars. Kaspars, go ahead.
Yes, so my name is Kaspars Cikmečs. I'm member of management board of LatVienergo, responsible currently for development projects and strategy. And probably LatVienergo is well known as one of the leaders in electricity production in Baltics, and also we have a vast amount of customers where we are selling electricity. And yes, and LatVienergo is not only had historically quite good energy mix with having 1.5 gigawatts of hydro power, and also thermal plants which use natural gas. But now we are in new strategy building a lot of new energy sources. Our goal is to add up to 600 megawatts new renewables by 2026, which will be up and running, and significantly more renewables adding up by 2030 and going further.
I have to turn on my mic again after a short cough here. Thank you, Kaspars, for your introduction, and let's go over to Ivars. Ivars, please go ahead.
Yes, my name is Ivars Zariņš. For more than 10 years I was in politics, being a member of parliament, 3 times elected, but before that, for 10 years I was Commissioner in Public Utilities Commission, which is also the regulatory body for the energy sector, so dealing with energy issues professionally, day-to-day basis for 10 years, which enables me later on, being in the parliament, to deal with energy issues with adequate competence and understanding, regardless I'm a politician.
Fantastic. Giles, over to you now.
Hello, I'm Giles Dixon, the CEO of Wind Europe. I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you there in person today. The reason I cannot join you in person is that I'm in the United States. Yesterday we had the first ever high-level government and business forum on offshore wind between the European Commission and the US administration. Kadri Simpson and Ditte Juul-Jørgensen from the European Commission asked me to accompany them to this meeting. It was a significant event with Jennifer Granholm, the US Energy Secretary, the director of the US Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the main permitting authority in the US for offshore wind. And there was a very strong desire between both sides to step up collaboration between Europe and America on the development of offshore wind, not least in the current geopolitical context.
Thank you, Giles. I think you're doing a great job over there and strengthening these transatlantic ties, not only on the policy level, but also on the practical business level, which is absolutely crucial for a more massive and scalable go ahead with wind energy and renewables in general. So thanks for being there, representing European industries and interests as well. Julia, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here today with you. My name is Julia Bali. I'm representing Orlen Group now. Orlen Group is not just only about oil and gas anymore. We have a huge portfolio of business lines and Poland's energy policy and also Orlen 2030 strategy define a key role of offshore wind into Poland's energy transformation. And inside the whole Orlen Group, I'm responsible for the projects connecting with Polish economical zone of the Baltic Sea, but also for the whole Baltic countries.
Thank you. It's quite obvious that countries are increasingly moving away from fossils, even those who have relied on fossil fuels for a very long time. So that's an inevitable development. And Hanna, once again, I know you've been part of the first panel, but please just remind to those who just have connected.
Yes, thank you. My name is Hannah Mary Goodlad. For anyone who's just joined us online, I head up the Baltic Sea development within Equinor. Equinor is a broad energy company, oil, gas, renewables, and low carbon solutions. And we have an ambition to have 30% of our capital expenditure dedicated to renewables and low carbon by 2025, and scaling that up to 50% by 2030. And I gave a reflection in the first panel about the energy trilemma, and I want to just give another sort of macro reflection about energy transition versus energy addition. And it kind of goes into your point there, Rinus, about even oil and gas states are transitioning away. Since 1992, when countries signed the Kyoto Protocol to limit CO2 emissions, CO2 emissions have continued to rise year on year on year, apart from two events, 2008 and 2020. And that was the global financial crash, 2008, and 2020, well, you all know what happened then. That was the global pandemic. And those drops in CO2 emissions didn't happen because of technology development or innovation or invention. They happened because demand dropped. And so I want you to sort of keep that in focus, that energy efficiency and energy demand is the greatest untapped energy resource actually that we have, and we're not tackling that efficiently enough today. So maybe we can touch on that as we talk about the cost of energy going forward. But for me, if you think of the last 30 years, CO2 has continued to rise apart from two episodes. For me, that's quite a stark picture.
Well, we have what we have. It is what it is currently, but I think we should pursue no regrets policy. So we know what happened in the past, and probably we've learned some lessons, and I hope we know where to go forward and how to do that. But I'd like to begin with Giles. Giles, all right, we are speaking about offshore wind energy, not only offshore but also onshore, but definitely when it comes to scalability, it's about offshore. It's good when we have wind blowing, and while the earth will be turning, there will be wind because of the change of temperature. So air masses will be moving, so there will be wind. So it seems that we are going to have wind forever, basically, at least during certain periods of day. There's going to be plenty of wind. It's good that there is plenty of wind, but what shall we do when there is no wind, actually? How reliable would you say wind energy is? If you would have to argue in favor of offshore wind, that still, regardless of these potential risks, wind energy is good.
Rinus, could I say something briefly to begin with about your point on scalability?
Go ahead.
Offshore wind? Yes, it is extremely scalable. But we have to remember that the European Union, yes, wants a big expansion in offshore wind between now and 2030 and an even bigger one up to 2050. But actually, they want an even bigger expansion in the volume of onshore wind that we have in Europe. By 2050, they want the European Union to have 300 gigawatts of offshore wind. Today, the EU has 16 gigawatts of offshore wind. By 2050, they want the EU to have 1,000 gigawatts of onshore wind. Today, the EU has around 180 gigawatts of onshore wind. So we need to build out a lot more onshore wind, and we're looking forward to Latvia building on the only 66 megawatts of onshore wind that you have today. So your question about how we integrate offshore wind, which, yes, still remains a variable source of electricity production. First point to note is that offshore wind, and in fact onshore wind, are less variable than they used to be. When wind energy started 30 years ago or more, the capacity factors in onshore wind farms were only around 20%. Capacity factor, of course, means if it's 100%, then your wind farm is operating 24/7 at maximum capacity. And 20% doesn't mean it's only operating 20% of the time. It means you're only getting 20% compared to the 100%. Now, there's no power plant in Europe or the world that ever operates at 100%. Let's be clear about that. But the capacity factors have increased significantly for both onshore and offshore wind because the turbines have become more efficient. They are now able to operate at lower wind speeds than they were when wind energy started. So if you build new onshore wind, you can expect to have capacity factors now of between 30 and 45%. And if you build new offshore wind, you can expect to have capacity factors of 50%. Of course, 50% is still only 50%. So how do you manage what remains variable supply? Well, the first thing you do is to try to have more variable demand. So you're matching the more variable supply, and you do this by giving consumers smart meters, by incentivizing industry that doesn't need to be manufacturing 24/7 at full capacity, giving them incentives to focus their production at times when electricity prices are lower because there is more wind and more solar on the system. Storage will play a role as well. We are already building wind farms with battery units inside them that are helping to balance the electricity that the wind farms are producing. We will need smart grids, some significant investments there, but this can be done. The best example of this is Ireland, which is a small country like Latvia. It's also an energy island, limited interconnection to Great Britain. Its annual average share of wind in its electricity consumption is 33%, but they've designed their system in such a way so that at any point in time, wind can be up to 75% of the total electricity mix. And they manage this by having a very dynamic market for demand response and for the balancing and other ancillary services that wind farms can now offer. And they want to go beyond 75%. They're quite happy with that having an electricity system based mostly on variable renewable electricity production is perfectly functional.
All right, thank you, Giles. Anybody else want to jump in on this? Kaspars, maybe perhaps you, Julia, I noticed you also nodding, right?
Yes, so probably when we're speaking about wind, then probably word reliable is like not the first word what comes in the mind, because that's actually that is how it is. Similar as Giles says, definitely capacity factor for offshore wind is better. It's up to 50% around. So it's very important still to look on total energy mix, and both in production side and also, as Giles mentioned, also consumption side. And I wanted to like link it with what Hanna said. So in consumption, actually, exactly electricity is one of the solutions. From one side, we can solve those demand response issues. Another also, we can reduce CO2. The same, we know that just energy efficiency, one way to improve energy efficiency is just switch off lights and do nothing. But another option is just to use more efficient energy in more efficient way. For example, petrol cars efficiency of internal combustion engine is like around 30%. Electric car have close to 90. So just by changing the way on transportation of different kind of electrified solutions, you are immediately, you can still travel the same way, but you are using less energy in total and also less CO2 consumption.
Julia?
Yes. I would like to say that offshore wind is a highly reliable source of energy. Of course, wind is variable, even out of the sea. Yes, you may also ask, are consumers taking a risk when the wind is stopped blowing? Yes, but the fact is that offshore wind farms are almost all the time producing, generate the energy, actually, generate power, and there will always be a backup option available on the grid. Yes, it's the first of all. And the second point that I want to highlight is energy storage, as Gable said. Among the most important advantage of the energy storage that is like balancing of frequency and voltage, and you could use this energy whatever you want. It will not be wasted. Yes.
Yes, definitely. So we have to somehow not only catch the wind energy, but accumulate it somehow, put it in the pockets or batteries, whatever. Ivars, what shall we do with wind energy?
Well, actually, things are changing. I remember that discussions some 20 years ago about that subject. And I remember what was the framework of it. It was, so no more than 10% of wind energy we can allow in the system. At that time, yes. Now it looks ridiculous, and we can laugh about it, but that was at that time. Well, I see the perspective how we can deal with this. Actually, all the solutions are known. We know them. They're well told already. So, firstly, scalability, then adjustments in the consumer side and the generation side. How to do this? There also are solutions. The problem is that there are no needed decisions for that. And probably this is what we have to think about and probably discuss about, how to get to those decisions. Because we know the solutions. Those who are in the industry, who knows the matter, can propose those solutions. And what can I say, being in this policy decision machine for more than 20 years, so firstly, as a regulator, being at the very ground level, closest to the industry, and after that, being for more than 10 years in the highest level of policymakers, being in the parliament, I can tell that the closer the level to the ground, the more competent, the more responsible are the decisions and this process of taking the decisions, and unfortunately, the worse wise. And I think that's the main reason why we cannot be so successful in promoting wind energy, this breakthrough of wind energy in the market, because many decisions cannot be taken just for objective reasons. One, and there is not only because of that someone is not competent enough or interested enough or probably have some specific scope of interest. There are objective reasons. Energy sector itself is a very complicated thing. And that's one thing. Another thing is that energy industry is not an industry within itself. It's an industry which general purpose is to serve other industries with necessary services and products, all the society. And which means that the policymakers, when they have to make a decision, they have to take care not only about the energy sector, but also the all interests of all other stakeholders. And if there are these contradictions of those interests between those stakeholders, then these decisions are delayed. And what industry needs to be done is to help to deliver those solutions, those decisions, to prepare those decisions.
Thank you, Ivars. Anna, you haven't commented on this. Do you want to jump in with this?
Yes, so I want to give a reflection first on what Igor's just said about the energy industry being wider than just production. If you look at global emissions, more than 75% of global emissions are resulting from the energy sector, either by our direct production or by the consumption of our products. So by default, if the climate challenge is an energy challenge, it's therefore for the energy industry to step up and really roll up our sleeves and be part of the solution, and a bigger part of the solution than we are today. And there's some great work that's happening within our industry to make that a reality. Back to Giles' point about energy mix, we need to start seeing the energy mix as an energy system that is not just a one-horse technology race. We need to have a diverse portfolio, which in turn makes it a stronger portfolio, so that when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, we have a backup. And we have systems that can play to the strengths of the weather systems we see across Europe and across the globe, with regards to storage, with regards to hydrogen, making sure that we utilize nuclear and we use gas to the best of our ability. So we need to go away from this sort of one-horse trick pony that we've relied on for such a long time, being hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons are wonderful, right? And I know that is a sort of strange thing for me to say in this context, but they're far too valuable to burn. So we need to be finding everything we can to decarbonize the parts of the industry that we can, electrify heat, electrify transport, electrify big industry, and be saving that sort of hydrocarbon usage for the very hard to decarbonize parts of our society. And one last point about energy transition versus energy addition. We need to guard against this just being an addition of renewables to the existing base of hydrocarbons that we have. We need to see a decline in hydrocarbon production.
So basically replacement, right?
We need to see a transition, exactly,
Yeah.
Rinus. We don't just need to add on renewables on top of what we already have. And it comes back to this point about consumption and efficiency and actually replacement, like you say.
Right, okay. So we've handled this one. Let's assume we have plenty more wind energy in 5-10 years' time, much more than we have today. All right. So, do you think what's your assessment? Does it necessarily mean that we are going to experience significantly lower, almost stable, and lower electricity prices? Who wants to comment first?
I can probably join. Yes, actually nowadays what we're solving several issues. One is like price issue, another is energy independence question, and definitely adding additional wind will help towards this equation. But this equation is way more complicated than just one wind. We know that wind have probably one of the lowest LCOEs currently, so it's cheapest way to produce energy. But as we discussed, capacity factor is somewhat lower. And let's face the facts. So even like now, we know that Latvia is probably popular of hydropower and some other power sources, but we have very small amount of wind power. In the same time, you can look on today's, for example, Nord Pool and see which country has the lowest electricity price today's average. Is it Latvia, Lithuania, Denmark, Germany, or France? And actually, it's Latvia who have lowest electricity price today, and it's not only today, but for basically most of last 2 months, like country with less wind energy. But that doesn't mean that we don't need wind energy, just it means that this equation is much more complicated. With help of wind energy, we are reducing amount of necessary natural gas in the future. Probably it gives us opportunity to produce green hydrogen, which again can be used in those times when there is no water, sun, and wind. So it is important, but sometimes I see the people oversimplifying. They saying, "Oh, wind has the lowest LCOs, that's why let's build wind, and wind will solve everything." Unfortunately, like you can just check facts on Nord Pool. It's not so simple.
Giles, do you want to comment on this this aspect of complexity, that it's not as simple as that we have plenty of wind, prices necessarily immediately very low?
Well, the first and obvious point to make in the current context is that so long as Europe is importing so much gas, and so long as Europe is using so much gas in the generation of electricity, then our electricity prices, regardless of what the form of production is, are going to be far higher than they should be, than they need to be, given the nature of electricity market design in the European Union. But we all know that, and we're all making great efforts to wean Europe off imported gas, and of course Russian gas in particular. It's right that you shouldn't just look at the levelized cost of electricity when you decide what your electricity mix should be, and when you try to predict what your prices of different sources of electricity will be in the future. Key point to make here is the surrounding policy framework has to be right, and key supporting infrastructure has to be in place. By key supporting infrastructure for offshore wind, I mean grid connections and port infrastructure. Without them, you struggle to build offshore wind, let alone operate it cheaply. Okay. The underlying policy structure is all about minimizing the costs of financing offshore wind. Let's remember the levelized cost of electricity has three components: capital expenditure, CapEx, the operating costs, the OpEx, and the costs of finance. Now, the costs of finance can often be the single largest of those three. And it's not just about are interest rates high or low. It's about how far you can actually finance a project with debt at manageable levels of interest, and how far you need to resort to equity to finance your offshore wind farm investment. Now, today, offshore wind farms are being financed roughly 70 to 80% debt, 20 to 30% equity. Okay, and it's been like that for some time, but there are pressures on that. And the biggest pressure on that is governments doing the wrong thing with their auction designs. So we build offshore wind farms generally on the back of a government-run auction. We bid in, it's a reverse auction, lowest price wins, and some form of revenue stabilization mechanism is offered by the government. The European Commission is very clear that the best such mechanism, the best form of auction, is the two-sided contract for difference. EU state aid guidelines say that very clearly, and more countries around Europe are introducing CFDs as the form of financing offshore wind. And CFDs are very good because they're cheap for governments, because, yeah, governments will be paying out some of the time when the auction price is higher than the prevailing wholesale electricity market price. But when the reverse is the case, then we, the wind farms, are paying back the difference to the government.
Mm-hmm. Just, Giles, for those not familiar with what is a CFD, could you just briefly, in a couple of sentences, explain that?
Yeah, it is a contract for difference. So the way it works is that governments run an auction for an offshore wind farm. The wind farm developers bid in, and they say, you know, we will build this wind farm at a guaranteed revenue of, let us say, 50 euros for the first 15 years of the project, which is when we're amortizing the asset and paying off the finance. Okay. If the, let's say 50 euros is the winning price, that's the lowest price that bids into the auction. If the market price is 40, so we're getting 40 off the market when we sell the electricity, the government will pay us another 10, okay? Because they've promised we'll always get 50, at least for the first 15 years. If the market price is 60, we pay 10 back to the government. Yeah, we do not earn the upside on the market price. That's our promise to governments. So governments are paying out some of the time, they're getting paid back some of the time as well. And in fact, in today's price context, governments are getting paid back most of the time, they're getting paid back quite a lot of money. Okay, but that's how it goes. Yeah, there are ups and downs here. You don't need to set aside much money as a government to fund this sort of system. Okay, the second advantage of this system is that when you've won your auction, you've got a contract for difference in your pocket, you go to the banks and the banks are very happy. They like what they see. They know you're going to be earning 50 euros a megawatt hour for the first 15 years. So they will lend you lots of debt at low rates of interest. They know you're going to be able to pay them back. If you don't have that, if you are building your wind farm on the back of what's called a zero bid auction, which some governments are running, notably the Netherlands, then the bank looks at your revenue profile and says, well, I haven't a clue what it's going to be. Yeah, it's the wholesale market price only. You've no revenue stabilization mechanism, unless you've got a corporate PPA that you've signed with a corporate industrial offtake, of course, yeah, at a fixed price, yeah. But if you haven't got that, the bank's going to say, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to lend you much debt for this project. You're going to have to finance this mostly through equity, and equity is much more expensive than debt. And this puts the financing costs up. And we've looked at the numbers on this together with financial institutions. And the results are, you can expect lifetime LCOE of 50 euros a megawatt hour over the lifetime of the offshore wind farm, if you have a contract for difference for an offshore wind farm. Without that, if you've bid in one of these zero bid auctions, and it's kind of a merchant project, you're looking at 92 euros a megawatt hour because you're paying so much more for your finance.
Thank you, Giles. I think it's a very important point that you raised. And just a year ago, we had this first conference, and it was actually quite interesting to hear the comments at that time when, well, electricity prices in the Nord Pool area were still rather low, all right? It was the end of April, there was plenty of hydro power production at that time, and things went south somewhere at the beginning, well, in the middle of June, basically, because the average price in June was already way higher than it used to be previous 5-6 years. So we started experiencing these changes, and what is different now? Well, the average market price for electricity currently is, well, X times higher than it used to be. So if last year there were comments that some of the wind farms which were planned for being upgraded in the Baltic Sea and also in the North Sea were actually skipping their plans or just freezing their plans for upgrading because there was no economical reason to do that. It was simply not, it didn't make sense from the economic point of view to invest in upgrading or even building new ones. It was frozen, that many projects were frozen. So now we can see that things have changed radically, and this change has actually served as a huge boost to wind energy industry. So not only upgrading the old farms, or decommissioning the old ones, replacing with newer, more efficient ones. So anyone wish to comment on the power of the markets and what sort of role does the market price of electricity play in investors willing to invest in wind energy? Julia, yes?
I just want to add that it's obvious that the whole industry demands stable and predictable energy prices. And if you think about the new technologies such as hydrogen or CCS, for example, we need to provide the investors, the business, the stable and cheap energy prices independent from the geopolitical situation, especially now facing the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And inside Orlen Group, we feel a huge responsibility for building energy security, not just only in Poland, but in the whole region, yes. I totally agree with Jabel about the CFD system, because in Poland we implemented this mechanism, and it's provides projects with stable prices, yes, and stable income, and also protects consumers from the price increasing, yes. And one more point I wanted to add, it's about the PPA contracts, because they are getting more popular, yes, all the time, and signing a PPA protects you from the unstable prices, and also PPA agreements, it's a very good decision for those businesses who want to decrease their environmental footprint and also to save money of energy. And of course, thinking about the decarbonization process, having in mind our refinery in Mažeikas, I want to add that for sure decarbonization targets will strongly depend on the price of the electricity, yes. And if we want to reach all the goals with the decarbonization, we should be aware of this.
Good.
Thank you.
Hanna, you wish to jump in?
Yeah, I want to echo what Julia said about the PPA market. I think that is a real area of growth across Europe, especially across some of the Nordic countries with heavy industry there needing to decarbonize and make their climate pledges stronger. I think that's very interesting. In the next sort of 8 to 10 years, we're going to see that market boom and provide an element of security as CFDs and as subsidies are phasing out, which in turn, as Giles said, will give more confidence to the banks. Confidence is key. Absolutely, when it comes to this industry, and confidence in terms of stable fiscal regime, a pipeline of projects, a supply chain that is mobilized, a workforce that is enabled and ready and equipped to go. That's key. And being able to invest, as Giles said, in ports and in a stable, reliable grid, that also attracts investment too. When it comes to the cost of energy on consumers, it's not a black and white answer. And this energy transition as we move towards 2030 and beyond is going to be unstable. There are going to be big winners and big losers, but we need a society to do everything we can to protect the effect on the customer. And I think that many of my colleagues have talked well on that subject about enabling industry to go in and have that predictability. I also think that enabling a wider supply chain and not setting too stringent local content requirements as opposed to recommendations, I think that's key, because ultimately that cost does go to the customer. And then secondly, the point is about energy efficiency, insulating of our homes, making sure that we have smart meters. That can save money in the back pocket today, as opposed to bringing on new energy systems and low carbon energy projects within 10 years. There's stuff we can do today, and I really look forward to see governments across Europe starting to think more about energy efficiency in their energy strategy plans.
Right. Ivars, you were looking at this and listening very carefully.
Well, probably the thing what I could add in this, while we are in this transition process, while we don't have those technologies of storage, of energy storage, we have to think about the solutions, how to deal with this volatility of wind energy. Because this is probably one of the main challenge and main the problem, if not solved, why financing is not so cheap, not available, why decisions are not taken. Because that risk has to bear then, if you not solve this, if you're not going with a solution for this, not proposing for decision maker, again, I'm thinking from the respect of decision makers, who has to care not only about the wind industry, but also for the rest of the stakeholders. If you will not help them to deliver this solution, how to deal with this volatility of wind energy, they won't be able to do it by themselves. And that's what I see. Come with management of the risks, how you deal with this volatility. There are solutions. For example, how the market has to be restructured. because how it right now operating, for example, if you take this, what happened, it seems this winter, when we had Nord Pool market price above 1,000 euros, and everyone had to pay this price. That was a situation when there was a lack of wind energy, there was restrictions and capacities from the northern Scandinavia, and as a result, to keep system in a balance, the last bit in the energy market was an old gas oil station in Sweden, which gave that price for all the market. But if the market would be structured in a different way, knowing that we might have such risks, and such risks has to be borne by the system operator as a system service, then we would pay this price just to this station, but all the rest market would enjoy probably the price somewhere at $200, 200 euros. It's just an example. Help decision makers to figure out, come with a solution which have a reasonable balance of interests for all the stakeholders, not just persuading, pushing the agenda which maximizes your benefits. That's what I hear from this discussion. Yes, you will be the winner. That's the point.
Yeah, Kaspars wants to comment.
No, not so much. Only what in beginning you said that there is a lot of people maybe seeing those high electricity prices and jumping to develop new renewable projects. Just to remind them that all renewable projects are at least 10 years payback, probably much more, and a lifetime over 20 years. So, and we well remember 2 years ago, 2020, when it was like record low electricity prices, and pandemics might return or something else, and it can be changeable. But there is solutions with colleagues, I think, told what should help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from what Ivars said, it sounded like policymakers have to keep in mind always what sets the price, and its merit order, right, of production capacities that you have, the cheapest first and the most expensive in the end. And what can we change in this merit order? Can we increase the proportion of this much cheaper electricity? I personally see the more wind energy as shifting this proportion towards a bigger proportion of cheaper electricity in the merit order.
When there is a wind.
When there is wind, yes. So we will be discussing balancing as well in some of the next panels as well. So, but if you wish to comment on the balancing aspect, you're welcome to do so as well right now. I don't know, Giles, do you wish to comment on these aspects of the intermittence and need to balance wind energy briefly?
Yes. On the back of what Ivars has just said, governments can do something to incentivize the wind industry to invest more in the technology that will support the system integration of our variable output. And they can do this by putting non-price criteria in their auctions. Now, up until now, auctions for new wind farms have been based on price alone. Yeah, the reverse auction model that I described earlier, yeah, and the developer bidding at the lowest price wins. And the European Union was promoting that model. The European Union is now promoting a different model. It's saying up to 30% of the scoring in a renewable energy auction can be non-price criteria. For example, how sustainable are the wind turbines? How recyclable are the blades? What's the lifetime CO2 footprint of the equipment inside the turbine? Another set of non-price criteria that governments can use and are starting to use now are criteria around what the wind farm is offering on system integration. So the Netherlands are running an offshore wind auction now, 760 megawatts. And the main criteria for that auction are what's your offering on energy system integration. Will you have batteries in your wind farm? Aha, extra points. Will you have electrolyzers, perhaps, or will you connect to electrolyzers? Yes, so that, you know, when you have a lot of wind that you're producing, some of it can be converted into renewable hydrogen. Ah, you have, then you score extra points. And this will incentivize the industry to invest more in these type of solutions that will make it easier for us to integrate variable wind in the energy system. One other brief comment on auction design, if I may. There are one or two countries around Europe that are tempted to say to the developers when they bid into the auctions, oh, and by the way, how much are you prepared to pay to build this wind farm? We've never had this before. Yeah, nobody's asked us to pay for the privilege of, investing huge amounts of capital up front and taking all the risks that comes with building wind farms, whether onshore or offshore. But one or two governments are now playing with this. Denmark, its last offshore wind auction, the winning bidder is having to pay 375 million euros, straight transfer to the Danish finance ministry. There's no added value to society from that other than money for the finance ministry. And the problem with this is it creates new costs for the project, which the developer will then have to pass on to consumers. So the electricity will be more expensive, and they will have to pass on additional pressure to their supply chain because they'll have 375 million euros less with which to buy their turbines. This is a very bad move indeed. Governments introducing this kind of negative bidding into their auction systems. One can understand that finance ministries are tempted, let's make some money out of all of these developers who want to build offshore wind farms. Yeah, I've heard the Estonian government, who you were talking to in the previous panel, say things like that. It's plain wrong and short-sighted because it will put up the cost of those wind farms and society will pay and the supply chain will suffer.
Oh, yes, there are definitely many more. Thanks for highlighting this. Actually, there are many more things under the surface than we can initially see. So that's one of the purposes of this conversation is indeed to bring those up. Hanna, of course, Equinor has plenty of experience in scalable wind energy. Do you wish to somehow build on what Giles just said?
I echo what Giles said about the cost going on the society and supplier. Consumer, sorry. That has to be avoided at all costs. And as tempting as it is to set these negative bids, we should be avoiding them and doing everything in our power to steer away from that. I want to touch on what Giles said about the sort of bundled and integrated optionality of energy systems, and trying to see this as a net zero ecosystem where you have reduction in carbon, you have consumption, and you have mitigation as well. And I think that we're now starting to see that customer-led approach to the market really driving the decision-making from the developer side of things. As opposed to going in on an asset-based led approach to markets, we're now approaching it the other way around and working backwards and going to the customer first, whether that's society, a country, industry, and asking what is it that the solution is being demanded here? How can we facilitate that and work backwards and see where that value of vertical integration of our products and bundling of our commodities at the customer interface, how can that create value for us as a developer? And that essentially takes down our costs of doing these projects, which translates into affordability for society. So I really sort of applaud that customer-based approach and working backwards as opposed to asset-based and technology-based, which is what traditionally our industry has always offered. We've gone to market with a technology and said, okay, this is our offer and this is what's on the table. Now we're starting to do things and work backwards from the customer.
Yes, it's interesting because you mentioned this, because sometimes I think for the general public, the feeling is that the energy industry is there only for itself, all right? So there's opportunity for business, for producing, all right? We sort of need also new capacities replacing old capacities or extra capacities. So let's jump in, let's invest a bit of money, but only if there is good profit expected on the horizon. For quite a number of years recently, the European Commission has put the energy consumer in the center of its energy policy. So the consumer is there, it's in the center of the picture, and it looks like the industry has had to adapt quite rapidly to this new user-centric approach of energy policy, and secure supply of energy, affordable energy, sustainable energy now, right?
If I could just make one point on that. At the core of the purpose of the energy industry, it's about providing progress for society. Energy at its fundamental level elevates people out of poverty. And that is something to be very proud of in our industry. And that is going to take a new face in the next 10 to 20 years with the energy transition. But at the core purpose, it is about providing energy for the progress of society. And I think that is something that we in the energy industry can really be proud of, that is a facilitation that our industry gives to society.
Right. Ivars, you sometimes have been skeptical about increasing the share of renewables in the overall energy system, but do you feel that things are changing fundamentally?
Well, if I look at my experience starting as a regulator of 20 years ago and right now, so the things are changed very, very dramatically, yes. Remember that time that there was the restriction of more than 10%, the system would not bear more wind energy, and we look at this. But what I'm trying to say that many things are dependent from the policy decisions, because I know the industry. Usually, when someone is saying, well, what to deal with the volatility of the wind energy, the industry is saying, well, it's not our problem. It's up to the market. Market will solve it. Yes, market is a good regulator, in many cases the best regulator, but probably this is not the case right now when we are coming to the systemic changes, when the growth of wind energy, the portion of wind energy in the system is so notable that there should be made changes in the system level. And market cannot do this by itself. If we will wait on the market will generate probably the situations we are not happy with, this price volatility in the market and even some market failures. Yes. In a parallel, when you are pushing your agenda for the more wind energy in parallel, give solutions for the decision makers how to implement it into the system, taking in advice that don't wait while the market will tell that you need new interconnections, that you need to make some systemic changes how the market is organized. Tell them in advice, this has to be done. Use your expertise. Use your experience, what you have for all those years. It's excellent experience. Just help decision makers to make those decisions. And I think that's the solution.
All right. I actually translate this as, or interpret this as a direct invitation to enhance the contacts between the industry and the decision makers to somehow enable them make more educated decisions, right?
And transfer their knowledge.
Okay, good.
Showing, the most important, deliver to the decision makers the solution which have this reasonable balance of interest for all the stakeholders. They have to care about it. Not just care about yourself, but yes. And that's what opens the door.
Good point. We are moving closer to the end of the panel, and I'm actually thinking of what sort of summary from your perspective and point of view each of you would like to say. Well, we have increasing capacity of wind power, energy prices. There are pros and cons, definitely, and we have to have the systemic approach. But Kaspar's coming from energy incumbent, with a quite interesting portfolio with huge presence of renewable energy, hydropower. Are you still, interested, and is there incentive to invest in wind power?
Definitely, yes. So it's very clearly on new strategies that we will develop a lot of new wind capacity. We're developing onshore, offshore, and we're doing it both by ourselves, like greenfield projects, and also partnering and working with other partners in Lithuania and Latvia, and also Estonia would like. So we are very open in cooperation. And also probably a summary, it's very important total generation mix. So it's there, if you have like in renewables, water, wind, solar, which is very important, and also Latvenergo during last couple of years is very strong position in Baltics to install new solar to customers, but also in Lithuania we're working on bigger solar parks. And later, I think what is a missing part, and also what Ivars mentioned about regulator, probably wind and solar seems it's already like having good tailwind, and it's moving forward because of good commercial and price issues. But the question is about storage. I see so storage is still lagging behind. Yes, we know we are speaking about big storage and hydrogen projects, but they are still like somewhere in the future, yes, and that is the issue. In our strategy also, number 4 of new behind both winds and solar is hydrogen projects. We plan to develop pilot project in next few years, like pilot project, and later let's hope that it will develop something bigger. And still in the same picture, we should look at some even future technologies like SMRs or something, which is probably more than 10 years away and even more unclear than hydrogen. But that's something where I think it's issue, and that's my example about this today's electricity price. It's not about wind, but it's about what is in those hours when there is not blowing wind, what is those other energy sources, because old ones are gradually getting older and not being repaired because this working time is too small and owners are not doing it.
All right, thank you, Kaspar. So very brief summary words from the rest of you, Julia, Hanna, and eventually Giles. Julia, go ahead.
Okay, according to its strategy, Orlen Group assumes to be the leader of the offshore wind energy in the Baltic region. That's why we have our first project, offshore wind project, the Baltic Power. It's a joint venture project together with our Canadian partner. Also, PKN Orlen has applied for the all 11 locations in the Baltic, in the Polish economic zone of the Baltic Sea, and we are looking very close for the whole Baltic countries. Also, in my opinion, using offshore wind to heat our houses, to fuel our cars, seems like a perfect way to finally marriage technologies with nature cycles, you know. So we should definitely pay attention on this. And also, Orlen, not just only a consumer of energy, we also want to be a producer of energy. So we know this business, we know how to do this. We see all the pros and cons, two sides of the medal, as they say. And also we see a huge potential in developing the hydrogen technologies. That's why we have our hydrogen strategy in Poland, and also we implemented the hydrogen strategy inside the company.
Thank you. Hanna, Equinor is still willing to jump into the water of competition. The Baltic Sea is not so big as the North Sea.
No, it's more compact and perhaps a more collaborative space, and that's exciting. Equinor wants to shape the future of energy, no less, and we want to be a leader in the energy transition, and we are. And we're in this for the long haul. If you think about the word sustainable, it is the ability to sustain. And we provide energy, and we want to be doing that in 50 years' time as well. And that energy mix will look very different from what it is today. But we're in this for the long haul, feel very confident about where the energy transition is going, and we want to play a big part, and we will continue to do so.
Great. This sounds encouraging. And last but not least, Giles, just to sum up the conversation for this panel, you have the honor.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Rinus. We have to work very closely with local communities and with all the other stakeholders out there representing different societal and economic interests that have a stake in the same sea space, and for onshore wind, the same land that we want to use, okay? By communities, of course, I mean coastal communities who will invariably benefit from the development of offshore wind because it brings jobs, but this needs to be explained very carefully to them. In particular, we need to engage the fishing communities and fishing industries insofar as they exist in those areas, yes, that may be worried about loss of catch because we're taking up a lot of space in the sea. Well, no reason why fishermen shouldn't be able to fish inside offshore wind farms, provided it is passive or pelagic or transit fishing and not bottom trawling. Similarly, we need to engage with the shipping industry, on maritime spatial planning. We need to engage with all of the environmental and biodiversity interests. Offshore wind has impacts on biodiversity, and these can often be very positive. Aquaculture. The Netherlands are farming oysters for the first time for 100 years, thanks to offshore wind and the clean environment on the seabed inside offshore wind farms, because there's no dredging, there's no trawling. And you can build artificial reefs and you can farm oysters, mussels, seaweed. We're doing the latter in Belgium, for example. Of course, we have to monitor the long-term cumulative environmental impacts, but we do that as we go along and we modify things accordingly. And finally, we need to engage very closely, of course, with the military authorities, yes, both with navies and with air forces. And again, here, this can be a very positive and happy form of coexistence. And if you want to know more, look to the model country on coexistence between wind energy and military activity, which is your neighbor, Estonia.
Thank you, Giles. This sounds really good. I think 2 keywords here: cooperation and mutual respect. So let's finish this panel on this positive note, and I very much like to thank all the panelists on panel number 2, and let's join me in a round of applause.